Hello, havoc wreakers, and welcome back to our little dose of hope every week. If you're just joining us, I'm Lauren Shippen, creator of 2000 and Late, and in an effort to balance out all the shitty stuff the audio drama tackles, I talked with some incredible artists, creators, and activists who are grappling with our twisted reality and doing hella cool stuff to counteract the bad. This week, I'm talking with writer and educator Lux Alptraum, who's written about a myriad of fascinating topics, mostly focused around sex. Sex has always been a hot topic, but it feels particularly hot right now as censorship rises and we see renewed attacks on queer people and women. And it's a topic that's always interested me, whether thinking about the implications of consent if you're possessed by a demon, or looking at how the internet's restriction of explicit content will lead to censorship of all kinds of things. So I really enjoyed talking to Lux about how our conversation in society about sex has changed throughout the years. And just a quick housekeeping note, there were some technical difficulties with me retrieving the audio from the software we used to record. So if anything sounds strange at any point, weird cuts, my audio being weird, that is why. But I think you'll still really enjoy this conversation with Lux Alptraum. You've been writing about sex for many, many years at this point, and I'm curious what first drew you to the topic and how you feel the conversation has changed since you started writing about this, because I imagine it's changed quite a lot.
So it's been a very long time at this point, but no, I kind of credit my introduction to the topic with the fact that my mother was a virologist actually in the 90s and
wow.
studied HIV and got involved in the local HIV activism community. And that was really fascinating to me. And when I was 14, I was really interested in HIV education and sex education and also theater. And that led to me joining I forget what it was called. It was like the street performance team. It was a sex education or specifically HIV education through theater youth group affiliated
Incredible.
with the Greater Buffalo Red Cross. And so that was kind of like my first in was, being a teenager, doing really, really terrible plays, doing HIV education. But from there, I got to college and I knew I was interested in this. And I did, HIV counseling and I worked with the sex education center. And this was also turn of the century. And I was really fascinated by this what was then really new and felt incredibly radical, like in the online porn movement. And I saw people like me who were creating porn sites, and I was like, whoa, this is like, my mind is blown. I thought you had to look a certain way and be a certain way in order to make sexual content.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up first modeling and then running my own site. Did that for a little bit. Then I went into more traditional sex education, working with high school and middle school students for a few years. And that all kind of led up to me writing for Fleshbot, which is kind of that was my entrance into journalism and sex media. And that was, the programs I was working with were defunded. I wanted to write about sex on the internet again. And I just happened to luck into that job. But I came to it through being really, really fascinated by sexuality, wanting to normalize sexuality and improve the conversation around it. And, for me, sexuality has always been the topic that I find the most compelling, in part because it's taboo. And I think it's weird that it's taboo, that something like so fundamental to so many people's lives is something that we're not allowed to talk about. And so making art about sexuality, doing sex education, writing about sex, writing about porn, all of these things have just been just extensions of that larger interest.
I really love they started out in sex ed around HIV and sort of the social movement there. And that's something that I find so compelling about your work is the way in which sex and social change interact. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, because I think you're right. Like, it is a taboo subject, and it's something that I think people don't always think of when we are talking about making a more progressive world, but that I think is so integral to progressive movements and to social change. And I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just always going to go to the place that people are uncomfortable with. Like, that's kind of what it is for me. Like, I'm just always like, but why? Why is this off limits? Why is this uncomfortable? And with sexuality, it's really interesting to me because I think when you say that you are interested in sex, people assume that it's kind of prurient interest, that it's sex entertainment, that you're just like, I want to fuck everyone and blah, blah, blah. Like it's just always assumed to be one specific lens. Or if you say like, I want to make a show about sex, people are like, oh, great. So you're going to give blowjob tips. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. That just is not my specific lane. And for me, it's always been the way that we talk about sex, the way we interact with sex, I think says a lot about our society. And I think it's interesting in repressive societies, sex is just one of the first things that people try to control. And, I think it was almost a decade ago, maybe, I wrote a piece a while ago about Proud Boys, and specifically like Proud Boys. I don't know if this is still part of the thing, but definitely in like the earliest ethos, the Proud Boys had like rules about how you could masturbate. And it was this very like, it's like the no wanks policy, I think they called it. And it was like, you weren't supposed to masturbate. And if you did masturbate, like a woman should be present. And it was this whole thing. And the piece that I wrote, I was just like, fundamentally, like, this is about this movement, this reactionary authoritarian movement trying to control your life and trying to control the most personal part of your life. And when you look at a lot of repressive movements, they come for your sexuality and they tell you that there is a correct way to be sexual, and they map out what it is, and they will encourage monitoring. They will do all of these things. And that for me is so fascinating, because I think it is really worth asking, why are we so afraid of sexual freedom? And I also just want to note too here, a lot of people think sexual freedom fundamentally means like, oh, having as much sex as possible. And that's not what it is.
Right.
Because, now, when I was coming up, the panic about the youth was they're having too much sex. Like, oh my God, teen pregnancy, blah, blah, blah. The kids are too slutty. In my 20s, there was panic about hookup culture, obviously continual panic about about porn access, all of that. Now, the panic is that the Zoomers are not having sex. Right. And it's so interesting to me that it's like, wait, the Zoomers are doing the thing that I was supposed to do, and now it's bad. And I think that it's, no matter what you do, you're always having the wrong amount of sex. And it's not about healthy sexuality. It's about this art. It's again about social control. And that's kind of what I'm so fascinated about is the way that we are constantly told there is this one correct way to have sex, or there is a better way to have sex. And to me, like, yeah, there's a better way to have sex in that you should have sex in a way that feels authentic to you and to the person that you're with. And sometimes that means not having sex at all. And that's also fine. Right. But we don't get that message. We get messages about sex that really want to shame us. And like, I'm in my early 40s now. So I've been thinking about this since I was a teen. And it's been interesting to me, like this evolution of what the right message, what the right type of sex is, but it's always there to kind of like shame people who are not doing it correctly. Like when I was kind of coming of age, when I was in my early 20s, there was a lot of like emphasis on how important it was to perform cunnilingus on people with vulvas. And that was like the correct way to have sex. Like, you got to eat a girl out. You got to do this. I don't like that activity personally. Sure. I don't enjoy it. And yet I would hook up with people who would force it on me in the name of feminism. And there was this like weird, it's just this weird thing of like, oh, you only think you don't like it because like this is what all women really want. And it was so strange to me that it was the same messaging that women had gotten around penetrative sex or around this or that, but this was supposedly feminist. And it was like, oh, you just don't like it because you're ashamed of your vulva, or you guess you think you smell, or blah blah blah. And I'm like, no, I don't like it because it doesn't feel good. Right. And I'm not interested in interrogating why. Like, it's like, it has nothing to do with like shame about my body. It's purely just like, this is just not what does it for me. This is not how my parts work. But I I got badgered by partners, and it was so strange because it was like supposedly in the name of female sexual liberation that I was made
You're
to
being
feel
shamed for having
yeah,
opinions as a woman.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And so it's just so interesting to me, like again, like the specific acts change, but this underlying ethos that like, well, you're probably doing sex wrong,
Yeah.
and I am going to tell you how to do sex right is just constantly being drummed out in the media, you know, like, yeah.
If you had to define the quote unquote correct way to have sex that is sort of being messaged right now, if there is a cohesive message, how would you define that for American society specifically?
Yeah. I mean, I think the message that I'm seeing now, which we started seeing, I think in like 2019, is this panic that young people are not having sex.
Mm.
So that's like the overarching, like, it's not even in the specifics of how you should be having sex.
But you should be having sex.
You should be having sex.
Yeah.
And there is this like panic around, oh my God, young people aren't doing it, yada, yada. Like, oh, they're not, we're like falling birth rates, blah, blah, blah. Some of these falling birth rates are, of course, because we have less teen pregnancy, which was the goal.
Which is good, yeah.
But, you know, I'm just seeing like a lot of panic about like, oh, yeah, now it feels very much like young people are not having sex. All young people do is watch porn. Like there's a fear around, and some of it I think is a legitimate, is like coming from legitimate concerns. I do think, especially with the pandemic, young people and technology, the relationship there, not always healthy. But to me, that's not about like how much sex they're having. Like they should be having the amount of sex that's correct for them in their eyes. And
right.
And I see panic that they're not having sex. The thing that's funny to me is, 15 years ago when people were maybe initially freaking out about young people's exposure to porn, although that's really been going on for forever. But let's say like this like more recent wave, there was this sense of like, oh, it's bad because they're all learning to choke. And they're all they're all learning that rough sex is normal, blah, blah, blah. And it was this idea of young people are going to see sex and they're all going to be just like super promiscuous, like constantly going out, fucking everyone. And now we're seeing like, oh no, like they're not having sex and this is terrible. And I do think probably there's some degree of, at least in some pockets, people exposed to porn at an early age and became scared of sex, maybe. Like I'm sure there's something there. But it's just so interesting to me. Again, it's like always this moving target, but the young people are bad and wrong.
Right. And to your point, like there are probably like conversations to be had in here about like, yeah, maybe somebody who's exposed to porn like too young and it's maybe like shaped some unhealthy ideas about the way that they view sex. Because also porn is not all created equal, right? Like there is you can, I imagine, like do extreme acts in porn in a consensual and healthy and safe way. And then there's porn that's made that I'm sure is not doing that, right? That, like with everything, there's a spectrum. But I think that like I have been very interested to sort of watch the ways in which specifically our government is like approaching solving this problem with these new laws around like age verification for porn sites. And I think that like, I also think that like social media and the internet in many ways has not been like awesome for growing up, right? Like I did not come of age, and I was in college when social media started to get pretty big. So it's like, I obviously don't have the on boots on the ground perspective, but I think we can all agree that there are things on the internet that we would prefer like 11-year-olds not to see. But like having to show your ID to get onto Pornhub does not feel like the solution. And I'm curious what you think about all of that.
Oh, I mean, I've been writing about this for years. I do agree that there are many, many problems with age verification, from just privacy concerns, from the fact that it's not really about ensuring only adults get access. It's about making it so that people don't go to law-abiding sites, basically. Right. It's about like decreasing demand, but really what happens is that people are just like, well, I'm not gonna give Pornhub my ID, I'm just gonna go to this shady site that's not asking for my ID, and that creates a whole host of other problems.
Right.
I think if we were really serious about this, we would maybe say like you have to require a credit card or something like that. Like a credit card, fairly simple form of age verification. That said, I mean, the thing that really sticks with me about young people and porn and young people and the internet more broadly is that the reason why porn is as potentially destructive as it is for young people is because it is often the only exposure to sex that people
Right.
get in a vacuum. It's like if you never had a physics class and all you saw were Michael Bay movies. Yeah, that would be like really destructive for your understanding of these things. Or like nobody told you to use a seatbelt and you just watched like Fast and the Furious movies, like things like that. Like, yeah, I think that's a problem. And it's frustrating to me that what we see from our culture, from too many parents, and now from the government is like, well, I don't want to actually talk about sex with my kids. I don't want my schools to talk about sex with my kids. I don't want them to have any exposure to any kind of healthy messaging about sexuality or any information about sexuality. I want them to be locked in this garden and never see anything. And then, they'll be 18 and they'll figure it out.
Right.
It's
and they'll be fine.
The line I've always used is it's like, what if I never taught you to read and then you were 18 and I was like, here's the New York Times. 18-year-olds read the New York Times. Like, you're fine now, right? Like, no, that would not actually work. But that's how we treat sexuality. Yeah. And, I was really fortunate that I grew up in a home where my parents cared about discussions about sexuality, that I had limited. I wish I'd had better sex ed, but I did have some sex ed in my school, and I was allowed to like seek out information. It was encouraged for me to like learn about sexuality, and I was exposed to a lot of things that like helped me develop a healthier. I think a lot of us don't have healthy ideas about sex, but certainly a healthier idea about sex. Where I was like, sex is not shameful, all of that. And what I see now, it's not just internet porn that these laws are trying to lock away. The same people who are talking about like, oh, you need to show your ID to keep kids away from content material that's harmful to minors. They're using that same line and that same logic for book bans. Right. And so, like my friends Erica Moen and Matthew Nolan wrote this really amazing book about sexuality that is one of like the top banned books.
Jeez.
And I think it's called Let's Talk About It, right? And it's this comic book, and it is very it's really frank about sexuality. It's intended for teens. It got all of these really positive reviews, and it gets held up at these parent-teacher association meetings and called porn and all of this because it has like drawings of genitalia, and because it does talk about like sexting, and it does talk about pornography, but it also talks about it in this way of like, this is a thing that people do, and maybe it's not right for you, and you should wait until you're older, and here's like safety information. It approaches it not in like encouraging kids to do it, but in acknowledging like, you're going to be exposed to these things. Here's what you should know. Like you probably want to wait to do it until you're in a trusting relationship, until you're older. But when it feels right to you, here's the information that you should know. I think they also talk, and this is something that is utterly absent from a lot of sex education that we get in schools. Like they talk about pleasure. I think they talk about like anal safety and health. Like, when we hear sex ed, a lot of times it's like, talk about consent, talk about condoms, talk about birth control. That's not really sufficient. Like, there's this idea if schools acknowledge like that sex is supposed to be pleasurable, or acknowledge like anal safety, that they're somehow like encouraging young people to have sex. And I had a boss years ago who said umbrellas don't cause rain. Condoms don't cause sex. Like,
right. And we have so much information about how abstinence only does not lead to fewer pregnancies or fewer STIs.
Oftentimes when kids get like holistic sex ed that acknowledges all of these things, they often wait. Because if you're honest about sex, it's like, oh, wait, that is something that like I maybe want to wait about. Like maybe don't want to rush into that.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, like I grew up in New York, a very liberal place, and my sex ed was still like very paltry in school. I think we learned about condoms and STIs, and that was kind of it. Like I got most of my information about things like consent and like the emotional side of sex, and even things like birth control from novels, from
Yep.
books that I was like finding. Like there's this one Tamora Pierce book, a fantasy book, where like they have a very frank conversation about birth control before having sex, and it's like that was sort of my teaching. And so I think it's obviously we need better sex education in schools across the board, but also we need to not be banning books that kids can seek out on their own if they are curious about these things and they want to learn about them in a healthy, constructive way.
Yeah. No, it's again like it's this fantasy world where it's like if we'll just keep you away from everything and then you'll just sort of like magically develop an appropriate like healthy sexuality.
Yeah.
Like I think people do think that there's somehow this like state of nature correct sexuality that will just blossom in a person if they're exposed to no information about sex, and that is simply not how
True.
it is. Like what
Yeah.
is that like? I never watched it, but I remember people making jokes about like some reality show about Mormons or whatever, and like where they would always like kiss at their wedding, and it would just be like the most awkward, like bizarre kiss because they'd never kissed before and they didn't know what they were doing, and now they're doing it on a public stage. Like, yeah, I think that's maybe not a great way to.
Yeah, especially when, also young people are spending more and more time on social media platforms, and social media platforms in which I am skeptical about how much places like TikTok actually censor videos that say words like sex and suicide and kill and murder. But certainly there is at least a degree of self-censorship happening on those platforms, which is something you've written about before, and it's something that drives me completely nuts. And I'd love to hear your perspective on like why that's happening amongst young people, and sort of like what your view on the productivity of that is.
Yeah, I mean the story that I always think of when I see somebody say like segs or lesbians or whatever is 20 years ago, like back when I was working with middle school students. I remember some teacher was like, because kids would like laugh because we would say like penis and vagina
Sure.
and vulva and all this. And one of the teachers was like, no, this is actually like really important that you know the proper words. And she told this story. She was like, I knew this like girl or whatever. And she was taught to call her like vulva her cookie. And she was sexually assaulted. And then she goes to the doctor and she's like, somebody touched my cookie.
Oof.
And like, I think whether or not that's a true story, I feel like there's probably a
There's,
lot of truth in it.
yeah.
And I think, when you are self censoring, you are sending the message that these words are shameful, but
Hmm.
you're also kind of, you're, you are infantilizing the conversation. Like you're making it cutesy. You are taking away the ability to talk about this as a serious topic. And, I do think there's some merit to the idea that TikTok maybe hides things from the algorithm or
Hmm.
deprioritizes. TikTok is a little bit of a mystery to me. I like log
Yeah.
in and then I'm like, this
Same.
is really chaotic. But I know people who've like gotten banned for a variety of things. But regardless of like what TikTok is doing, there's this belief that TikTok is doing it, which then has promoted this kind of self censorship. And it's so weird to me. Like, I remember one time I was doing an interview with somebody who was selling a safer sex product, and she kept talking about peach fun. And I was like, what is she talking? And then it finally occurred to me, it's like, oh, she's talking about anal sex. And it was so
Jesus.
disturbing to me. I was like, oh, you're like so TikTok brained that like you're now, and that's how I feel like every time I hear someone say unalive in
Oh
like
my
real
God.
conversation. And I'm like, okay, I guess this is just slang now, but I find it like a little disturbing. And,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, like the queer community has a long history of code words like friend of
Sure.
Dorothy and all of that. And it eventually becomes kind of part of the culture and sort of insider slang, whatever, whatever. But I think like we should worry about the fact that like we might feel the need to censor ourselves or to use code words and like what that says about the state of our culture. And right now, the
Yeah.
state of our culture is very anti sex, like very increasingly regressive about queerness.
Mhm.
It's just moving in a way where we're all kind of being reminded that the correct way to be is white, Christian, straight, and trad. And that's really disturbing. And, I live in Brooklyn. I'm a 42-year-old bisexual woman. I've been out for almost 30 years. I'm not going to be pushed back into the closet. That's just not
Right.
happening.
Yeah.
Like, I live my life. But I do worry about what message young people are getting, and particularly young people who are in communities that are more conservative. Like, the internet used to be a place where young trans people, young queer people could go and see themselves, no matter how conservative their home communities are, and that is being taken away. And it's being taken away in part because a lot of these conservatives are like, the internet made my kid gay, and it's like, no,
Right.
your kid was gay, and
They found themselves
the internet
like
just gave them
reflected.
support.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's this feeling like, if I take away the internet, my kid won't be gay. And it's like, no, your kid will just be miserable and possibly kill themselves.
Well,
Like,
right, exactly. I mean, that is I think one of my primary concerns around things like censorship on the internet and book bans and the age verification laws and things like that. It's like I grew up in a very queer accepting family, and also very queer family. I have lots of family members who are gay and bisexual, and it still took me like 22 years to figure out that I was bi, just because, sometimes I was a late bloomer in many, many ways, but a lot of that was spending time on Tumblr and in fandom spaces and sort of realizing like, oh, like the older generations of queer people that I've grown up with, who are wonderful and who've taught me and exposed me to so much, still sort of had like a little bit of a, like binary conversation, at least, whether or not their thinking was binary. There's still, the queer conversation around bisexuality for a long time was
and remains.
Remains difficult at times. And it really was those like fandom spaces that even someone, like me, who grew up in a very accepting family and was instantly accepted and all of that, and knew that I would be instantly accepted, those spaces were still so important to me. And it really, And I also make a lot of art with queer characters, and have gotten messages from young people saying, I live in a very conservative place with a very conservative family, but like, I can listen to your podcast and they don't know that I'm engaging with something that's queer.
Yeah.
And if there was like, a lot of my podcast episodes are explicit. If there was age verification all of a sudden on like listening to podcasts, like that would be a nightmare.
Yeah. And that could very likely happen. I mean, because of course it's like, what is explicit content? Like, everybody thinks like, oh, they just mean like really hardcore sex and kink stuff, blah, blah, blah. There has to be nudity. There has to be this. But we see time and time again that the second that people get on board with banning porn, the definition of porn rapidly expands.
Yep.
I mean, it's already been the case. Like, oh, okay, a straight couple kissing in a movie, like, that's like PG, but like a gay couple, well, that's all. Oh, that's R. We've already like treated queer sexuality as more explicit, more prurient, like more, more adult. And so then, of course, it's like naturally going to get rolled into porn, and that's really disturbing. And I mean, it's funny. I have a lot of thoughts, so give me a second. But I'll say like one thing that's always interesting to me with there's sort of like this rapid onset gender dysphoria kind of thought. So like, this was for people who don't know, this term that was basically arguing, oh, the internet turned my kid trans. Like, my kid was completely normal, and then they were on TikTok, and suddenly they decided they were a trans man or a trans woman. And there's a lot of reasons why this is likely bunk. But one of the things that's sort of embedded in it, which I think we see in conversations now that we're seeing like large numbers of Gen Z women identifying as bisexual, we're seeing more people identify as ace, more people identify as queer in a variety of ways. There's this idea of like, oh, they saw an internet thing and they decided it was trendy, and now they're identifying that way. And the thing that I would always ask is, so? Like, there's this like weird like So, like, what does it matter if a person thinks they're bisexual and then decides they're not?
Yeah.
Like I don't understand what the harm is. Like, I get that, like, oh yeah, with like trans kids, there's just like, well, I might get surgery and then regret it, and it's like a lot of people don't. And like,
Yeah.
like
And what you have to
transition
go through to
regret.
get there is
Yeah,
really involved.
and like, and I know people who've like tried testosterone and decided it wasn't for them and then
Yeah.
didn't do it. Like, generally, you have to kind of be on for a while to have long term effects. And some people do go on and regret it, and some people regret everything. But there is like this idea that if you say you are trans or bisexual or whatever, that you have somehow ruined your life and there's no taking it back, and you better
Yeah.
be right about it. And it's crazy because a lot of people are wrong about being straight and a lot of people are wrong about being
Yep.
cis, and that's somehow fine. But it's just so funny to me, like, because I will say it's funny, like, a few years ago I was talking to some teenagers and they both told me they were ace. And
Mm.
and I just to be very honest about this, like, I didn't say this to them, but in my mind I was like, how can they even know? Like, they're just
Mm.
teenagers. And then, like, I was like, wait, you wouldn't say that about a gay kid, you wouldn't say that about a bi kid. So
Right.
I like had to sit with it, and I was like, okay. I was like, well, if they are ace, they would presumably know at this age. And if they're wrong, quote unquote, or if it's just a phase, like, that's okay. Like, it's actually, one of my friends was like, isn't it amazing that teens who don't want to have sex now, like, have a way to express
Yes.
that like gives them agency. And one of those teenagers later decided they weren't ace, and who gives a shit?
Yeah.
Like, I just feel like giving people freedom and flexibility to change is so important. And like, I think even in the queer community, there can be this gatekeeping. Like, we certainly see it
Hmm.
with bisexuals that, like, oh, you're not really queer, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And a lot of that, I think, comes out of this trauma. And,
Yeah.
and I want to be generous around that. But I also want to encourage people that, like, it's not about like gays versus straights. It's about like everybody just having the freedom to do what's right for them in any moment and pursue the relationships that are right. And that necessarily means like some people will think they're straight and then realize they're queer, or some people will identify as queer and then have relationships that appear to be more straight. Like, that's part of sexual freedom.
Yeah.
Like, some people will decide they're ace and not want sex and all of that. And this is all like part of, again, just like in any moment, you should be doing what feels right for you. And it's not like there was a recent piece in The Cut about this bi woman who, I didn't read it, but the gist was like she stopped dating men and she's like, my life is so much better now that I am a lesbian, or now that I ID as a lesbian.
Mm.
And like, great. But a friend of mine sent me this like lesbian herstory Instagram account that was so angry about that piece and was like, you cannot just decide to be a lesbian, and like, bi women, like, how dare you, like, lesbians are not interested in having sex with men, and you had all this sex with men and now suddenly you want to be and it's just like,
Oh.
lady, like, your dating pool just got bigger. Why are you mad about that?
Yeah. Oh my God, that's something that, I mean, and this is something I've talked to a lot of my, bi female friends about. Like, I'm now in a long term partnership with a cis man, but, I was dating lots of different people in my 20s. And yeah, I went on a lot of dates with lesbians who, like, when they found out that I was bisexual, all of a sudden the interest, really waned, and sort of being in those queer female spaces and hearing about things like gold star lesbians, right? Like, you're somehow more pure if you've never had sex with a man.
Yeah.
And it's like, why are we doing this? Why are we taking on the hallmarks of patriarchy and heteronormativity and like putting it on our community that we're building from the ground? Like, why on earth would we do that? It's always
Yeah.
been so bizarre to me.
No, I mean, well, because there's this book, I'm trying to remember what it's called. I don't know. There's this collection from like 1990 of just bi essays. I feel like it's called like By the Way, or it has some kind of punny title.
Yeah.
So when I first got it, I was like, oh, this is going to be terrible. And then I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is like incredibly, incredibly radical, even by today's standards. And they talked about the fact that, like, the the majority culture needs an opposite to demonize, right? So like heterosexuality
Mm.
needs homosexuality so they can prove that it is right and correct and homosexuality is wrong. And bisexuality then kind of like blurs this whole idea that there is like a binary, like right and wrong. And it's so interesting to me to see some queer people play into the exact same binary divide
Yeah.
and have it like, no, you're either straight or gay. And like, and all they do is flip the value system and say, like, no, 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 being gay is good and being straight is bad. And then
Hmm.
also, like, we don't know what to deal with bisexuality, so we're just throwing it out the window. Like,
Yeah.
it's so funny to me. Like, and I'm a bi woman who decided a few years ago I was no longer interested in dating men. Like, that could change,
Yeah.
who knows? But at the current moment, I'm just like, I feel like the women I'm attracted to are better people than the men I'm attracted to. So there's some like
Yeah, sure.
self-preservation in there.
Yeah.
Um, but it's so interesting because periodically I'm like, would I call myself a lesbian? Should I start dating as a lesbian? And it always feels wrong because I'm like, no, that's not the whole of myself. Like my
Yeah.
former self who wanted to date men, like that's a part of me and that has shaped my experience. And I'm really grateful to have like had all of these experiences. I think being somebody who exists outside of both straight and gay spaces, like you get perspective on both that people who are
Hmm.
within them often don't have at all.
Yeah, and I think that there's a real reluctance. It's something that has shown up in your work a bunch, a reluctance to have difficult conversations and to have nuanced conversations and to accept that people can grow and change. And it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about in how we can create a more progressive society and move forward in the way that we all want. And I don't know how we do that if there is this kind of conversational purity that needs to be achieved before we can have a real conversation. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that. I mean, you've written about Me Too and how men apologize and the effectiveness of that and what's acceptable and what's productive. And I mean, this is a big question, but how do you view the conversational and moral purity that seems needed by so many people now in order to have an actual conversation, and how we best move forward from that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say I'm a natural contrarian. So when anything is like the dominant view, I'm like, let me poke holes at that. Like,
Yeah.
could this be? Oh, everybody likes that. I don't like that. And then I'll be like, or maybe I do. But I mean, it's complicated because I think that the right wing is acting in very bad faith a lot of the
Hmm.
time. I think that the tactics that are employed by the right wing are the tactics that are used by abusers, like
Mm.
very literally.
Hmm.
And like abusers, it's not really about being right, it's about winning. And so you see a lot of like
Yeah.
unfair tactics across the spectrum in terms of how they debate, in terms of how they govern, in terms of things like gerrymandering. You see this sort of like, well, the rules don't matter for me, they matter for you. And I think that understandably, when that has been the opposition, people get like kind of freaked out and people get suspicious of each other. And
Mm.
I wish I had all of the answers. I think that we should try to approach people in good faith and we should assume good faith as much as we can. And then when they sort of prove themselves to be acting in bad faith, then we can like, okay. But I think like a lot of people are automatically assuming bad faith. And like I will say things and I'll like immediately have people jump down my throat and like assume XYZ. Um, and that's been really, it's like, I mean, it's not difficult for me. I'm like, whatever. But I find it not productive conversation wise. If like I say something that's not immediately like the approved leftist party line, and then people just assume that my values are XYZ when they're not. It's just there are certain things that I think about differently. I think we should spend more time realizing that if people have the same general goals as we do, that it's okay to disagree. Like a lot of people
Yes.
get it in their heads like you have to agree with me on everything or we're enemies. And I'm like, no, if you want a world where everyone is safe, if you want a world where everybody has healthcare and can afford to eat and all of that, like, we're great. Like, we're basically on the same page, and we may have disagreements about tactics, and that's fine. Like, we can sort that out. But it's like, I was one time blocked back when it was still Twitter, on Twitter, because I told someone that single payer was not the only way to get universal health care. And like, that was so wild to me that I was like, I want everyone to get health care. And also, like, there are many countries that have universal health care that don't have single payer, and single payer is one specific form.
Sure.
And this was like apparently a block-worthy offense. And it was so weird. Like, I was like, I feel
That's
like we
wild.
need to like allow for a variety of ways of, because that's how we also get better ideas, you know.
Yes.
If we allow disagreement, if we allow open conversation, if you say, like, I think that this is the best way to get representation, I think this is the best way, like, we can come together and figure stuff out. And again, I think part of it is because of how badly the Republican Party, the modern Republican Party, has exploited disagreement and exploited all of this. A lot of people can't understand the possibility of good faith disagreement, but like, that's actually like part of why Joe Biden and politicians of that era are so fixated on like talking about bipartisanship, was because of that mindset of like, when people who disagree come together, like, that means we're getting something better. And I think in this moment, it often doesn't mean that.
Right.
Because one of these parties is functionally a fascist party.
Yeah.
But I get where they're coming from. And I wish we could like move more towards that, because people are not going to agree on everything. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to have a conversation with me about difficult conversations. I would really encourage everybody to go check out Lux's book, Faking It, wherever you get your books. And we will also link to the bookshop.org link for that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here, Lux.
Thank you for having me.
Hey folks, Lauren Shippen here, head of Atypical Artists. And today I'm very excited to say that I have not just one audio drama recommendation for you, but a whole collection of audio drama recommendations for you. Hug House Productions is a podcast collective that focuses on spotlighting stories by and about marginalized groups. While their specialty is in fiction, they've also dabbled in documentaries and chat-style podcasts, so you can get a little bit of everything. And here's the rundown on just a few of their fantastic podcasts. You have Valence, a completed urban fantasy audio drama about an oppressed, anxious, cynical magic user learning to believe in himself by rebelling against a billionaire technocrat. So if you're enjoying 2000 and Late, check that out. And if you're looking for something more in the style of Breaker Whiskey, Desperado is a completed road trip audio drama about misfits from all over the world as they try to survive and protect their heritage from modern-day crusaders in a battle of old gods versus new gods. And if you've always thought, well, hey, I love atypical shows, but I wish they had a high fantasy show, well, let me tell you about Levian. It's Hug House's newest audio drama. It just completed its first season, and it is a high fantasy seafaring adventure filled with political intrigue, myths and monsters, and women who can and will kill you. So if you love Game of Thrones and Pirates of the Caribbean, but also thought, hey, those things could be gayer, then Levian should be right up your alley. No matter what you're into or what you're looking for, Hug House has something for you. Check out all of their shows at hughouse.productions.